Power isn't always seized in the thunder of cannons or the chaos of a coup. Sometimes it shifts in the silence between two heartbeats, in a room so quiet you can hear a crown beginning to tarnish. What you are about to read is a story of such a moment, a clash not of armies, but of ideas, where a prince who owned the future met a captain who remembered the past. This is the story of how a single question changed the world. If you believe the true strength lies in dignity, not dominance, then hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on what true leadership means. Now, let's begin. The room was a testament to power, carved from the earth and polished to a blinding sheen. Inside the Riyadh Economic Summit, white marble walls seemed to drink the light, reflecting it back through veins of pure gold trim. Beneath a massive banner proclaiming unity through investment, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman sat as the undisputed center of this universe. To his right, a row of European CEOs, their faces a mixture of deference and ambition. To his left, oil billionaires from the Gulf, men who measured wealth in generations. The air was thick with the scent of money and unspoken agreements. Across from them all sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso. He was an island of stillness in an ocean of orchestrated power. He wore no crown, his suit was simple, and his posture was one of observation, not participation. He simply watched. MBS leaned forward, his voice a calm, commanding current in the hushed room. "Africa is the future," he declared, his gaze sweeping over the assembled leaders. "But the future needs guidance, vision, leadership." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We can help your continent rise if you follow our model." A polite hum of assent rippled through the audience. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic offer. The CEOs nodded sagely, the billionaire smiled. It was the natural order of things, the wealthy leading, the aspiring following. But Traoré didn't smile. He didn't nod. He didn't move. As the moderator prepared to move to the next topic, Traoré's voice, clear and without tremor, cut through the perfumed air. It wasn't a shout, but it silenced the room as effectively as a gunshot. "Did Africa ask to be led?" Everything stopped. The nods froze, the smiles vanished, the flashing cameras faltered. MBS's mouth tightened into a thin, hard line. The question hung in the air, simple, profound, and devastatingly sharp. It pierced the veil of polite diplomacy and exposed the assumption buried beneath the offer of investment. The prince, a man accustomed to absolute agreement, tried to recover. "Brother," he began, forcing a conciliatory tone, "we are not colonizers, we are partners. You will benefit from our stability, our networks, our capital." But Traoré's calm remained unshaken. "He speak of capital," he replied, his voice still even. "I speak of dignity. You call it leadership. I call it intrusion." The tension became a physical presence in the room, suffocating the calculated pleasantries. The moderator, sensing the dangerous turn, quickly intervened, shifting the topic to logistics and trade corridors. The panel moved on, the summit continued, but it was too late. The story had already broken free. Before the session even concluded, hashtags began to flood the internet from Ouagadougou to Nairobi. The words weren't about investment or partnership. They were a declaration, sparked by a quiet captain in a marble hall. Africa leads itself. The first tremor of an earthquake had just been felt.
The question asked in the marble hall did not fade. Instead, it became a digital wildfire. Within hours, the hashtag Africa Leads Itself was not just a trend, but a global rallying cry. In Ouagadougou, students painted vibrant murals of a single resolute lion facing a distant golden throne, the words, "We follow no crown," inscribed beneath. Headlines from Paris to Pretoria swirled with the same name, Traoré. They called him a new voice from the Sahel, the anti-establishment lion. While Africa celebrated, Riyadh seethed. Behind the palace's gilded doors, MBS's advisors met in hushed, urgent tones. "He embarrassed the crown," one whispered. "On our soil," another added, the insult hanging heavy in the air. But Traoré wasn't playing by their rules. He had come not to ask, but to assert, and his quiet defiance had proven more potent than any angry speech. MBS didn't react publicly, but behind the palace gates, he was not pleased. He recognized this was not recklessness, it was deliberate. That afternoon, a private invitation was delivered to Traoré's suite. It was Spartan. No press, no cameras, just a location. The Royal Desert Tent, a place of ancient power, where deals were struck and dominance was subtly asserted under a canopy of stars. It was a summons. When Traoré arrived, MBS greeted him without ceremony. No titles, no translators. Just two men standing on antique carpets laid over the sand. "You embarrassed me," MBS said, his voice flat, stripped of its public charm. "I exposed a misunderstanding," Traoré replied, his gaze steady. They sat across a low, intricately carved table. Tea was poured into delicate cups, but remained untouched. MBS leaned forward, the intensity in his eyes matching the desert heat outside. "I don't want to conquer Africa. I want to invest in it. We built Niam in the desert, a city of the future. We can help build yours." A smile touched Traoré's lips, but there was no warmth in it. "You paved your desert with dreams," he said softly. "We till ours with survival. Africa doesn't need a savior, Your Highness. It needs a chance, on its own terms." The silence that followed was heavier than the air itself. MBS, a man who reshaped skylines with a word, was faced with a truth he couldn't buy or build over. He tried one last time, a final offer from a king to a captain. "Then let us lead together." Traoré didn't raise his voice, he didn't stand to leave. He simply held the prince's gaze and delivered the words that would define his legacy. "If leadership must be shared, it must be first surrendered, and I see no crown that's willing." He left the tent with no handshake, leaving the prince alone with the untouched tea and the vast, silent desert. That night, a new quote, attributed to an unnamed source from the private meeting, echoed across African social media. It spread faster than any press release, a final, definitive statement on the day's events. "You can't invest in freedom if you still expect obedience."
In the weeks that followed, Riyadh's formidable outreach machine shifted into overdrive. Leaked memos, strategically placed in international journals, revealed a coordinated effort to smother the embers of Traoré's defiance with a flood of capital. There was a proposal for $2 billion in infrastructure, meant to thread West Africa with gleaming new rail lines. A prestigious scholarship fund was announced, aimed at African engineering students. Most notably, a direct offer was made to Burkina Faso, a lucrative energy alliance to partner on solar and lithium extraction. It was a classic display of soft power, an attempt to prove that the crown's leadership was, indeed, benevolent. But Traoré didn't take the bait. He watched the flurry of offers from Ouagadougou and issued just a single, sharp statement that cut through the noise. "Our future will not be built by those who think in numbers, but by those who remember what was taken." This wasn't politics anymore. It was posture, and it was beginning to shake alliances. While Gulf analysts debated why this small-scale leader was being given so much oxygen, Traoré made his next move. It wasn't a speech or a press conference. It was an action. He announced a multi-country resource pact, linking Burkina Faso with Mali, Guinea, and Niger.
There were no Western intermediaries at the signing, no Gulf sponsors. At its center was a clause so simple and so radical, it sent shockwaves through the world of international development. All extraction contracts will be subject to landholder approval. It was revolutionary. It bypassed ministries corrupted by foreign interests. It sidestepped foreign banks that demanded crippling terms. It handed power back to the village elders, to the farmers, to the ground itself. From Riyadh, MBS watched as key Gulf-funded projects in Africa quietly stalled. In a neighboring country, a mining exploration project was halted not by the government, but by a council of village leaders who cited Traoré's language. A new phrase began to enter the lexicon of international think tanks, the SAHEL doctrine. An analyst from the World Economic Forum, writing in a widely circulated brief, gave the movement its name and its power. It's not anti-capitalist, it's post-imperial. In that precise framing, MBS saw the true threat. This was no longer a diplomatic spat or a rejected offer. It was the birth of an alternative legitimacy, a form of power that grew from the soil, not from a sovereign wealth fund. It was a narrative his petrodollars couldn't buy, a movement his influence couldn't control, and a future he hadn't been invited to lead.
The Gulf's media apparatus, a finely tuned instrument of influence, was unleashed. They tried to paint Traoré as unstable, an idealist with no grasp of infrastructure, a reckless nationalist who would drive his country into isolation. But something strange happened. Every attack backfired. The intended insults became badges of honor. In Senegal, protesters held signs with a simple, defiant question: unstable or untouchable? In Ghana, university students debated leadership versus ownership, citing Traoré's distinction. The more Riyadh tried to frame him as a threat, the more he looked like a champion. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, something even more profound began. A resource audit, conducted not by foreign geologists in sterile labs, but by villagers themselves. Local elders whose ancestors had known the land for centuries worked with young university-trained engineers to map where the lithium, uranium, and gold deposits ran. They didn't compile their data for a glossy investor prospectus. They shared it publicly online for leverage. It was a radical act of transparency, a declaration that their most valuable resource was not the minerals, but their own knowledge. Seeing this grassroots governance taking hold, Riyadh made one last overwhelming offer. Envoys were dispatched with a $400 million joint development deal. It promised everything: roads, schools, energy grids. But buried on page 6 of the meticulously drafted contract was the true price, a clause granting Saudi Arabia priority export rights for any discovered rare earth minerals for the next 20 years. Traoré read the contract in silence. He didn't summon his ministers or lawyers. He simply took a red pen, drew a single circle around the clause, and returned the document unsigned. Attached was a handwritten note: "If our ground feeds your future, it must first feed our children." The Crown did not like being told no. MBS's inner circle debated retaliation, cutting aid, freezing trade, but they hesitated, realizing that any overt punishment would only confirm everything Traoré had been saying. So they chose a quieter weapon. MBS instructed the kingdom's sovereign wealth fund to pause all new investment in West Africa. The move was strategic, a silent squeeze meant to starve the movement of momentum without looking aggressive. But Traoré already knew. That night, he walked into a televised town hall, speaking without a script. His voice was calm, but his words were steel. "We have had decades of foreign money," he told the crowd. "What we lacked was foreign humility." If investment ends because we dare to decide for ourselves, then it was never partnership, it was permission, and we no longer ask for permission. The video went viral, crossing oceans and language barriers. It even appeared in the Middle East, where a prominent Saudi professor posted the clip with a shocking comment. Traoré isn't anti-Gulf, he's anti-condescension. The quiet truth was finally emerging. Inside the palace, an advisor finally said what they all knew. "We thought we were offering leadership," he said, his voice heavy with realization, "but we were delivering it in a crown, and they've stopped kneeling."
Months later, at the Future Global Forum in Singapore, the world's most powerful people gathered to discuss the next economic chapter. MBS was the centerpiece of the final night, scheduled to deliver the closing keynote, but the room was not waiting for him. Earlier that day, Ibrahim Traoré had given an impromptu talk in a small breakout session. There was no formal invite, just a low microphone, a single chair, and a circle of delegates from emerging nations sitting on the floor around him. He didn't pitch proposals or flash data on a screen. He told a story. "A man once offered to show us the stars," he began, his voice quiet. "He wore gold and walked tall, but every time he pointed upward, his feet crushed our soil. So we stopped looking where he pointed and started planting what he stepped on." When MBS eventually took the main stage, he noticed something strange. A third of the audience had left. Those who remained were not clapping with the same fervor as before. They were watching, measuring, thinking. The shine of his crown no longer felt like vision. It felt like resistance to change. Back in Burkina Faso, Traoré orchestrated his most powerful statement yet. A former colonial military base, used for decades by foreign advisors, was converted into a public university for resource sovereignty and civic engineering. The opening ceremony was modest. No lavish displays, just students and villagers. In a defining gesture, an old, faded Saudi flag, once flown during joint military exercises, was respectfully folded and handed back to Riyadh's regional attaché. "We thank those who stood beside us, but we now stand on our own," Traoré said calmly. The image went viral. Traoré, with calm hands, handing over the flag, surrounded by students holding books instead of rifles. A new phrase was born: "Return the flags, raise the minds." Enraged, MBS made one final, desperate move. A personal envoy flew to Ouagadougou with a sealed letter proposing a joint Gulf African Leadership Summit with Traoré as the keynote speaker. It was a masterpiece of diplomacy, offering respect on the surface. But page 12 listed core governance expectations, and the final page required Traoré to publicly reaffirm regional alignment with the Gulf's vision. It was a gilded cage. He read it, then asked a staffer to bring him a small mirror. He placed it on the desk, angled it toward the letter, and said quietly, "If they want to see leadership, they should look at themselves. If they want obedience, they should send it elsewhere." He returned the envelope empty. And in that moment, MBS finally understood. He had tried to lead Africa by commanding its steps. Traoré was leading it by letting it walk. Back in Riyadh, in the profound quiet of his marble study, the prince stared at a world map carved into the wall. Golden pins once marked every Gulf-backed project in Africa. Now, several had been removed, not by war, not by revolution, but by dignity. Sometimes power isn't taken, it's returned. Ibrahim Traoré didn't raise his voice to silence a prince. He simply stood his ground and reminded the world that leadership isn't something you declare from a throne. It's something you earn by walking beside your people, not ahead of them. MBS came with offers, vision, and a legacy to build. But Traoré came with one thing more powerful than gold or oil: a people who remembered how to lead themselves. And once they remembered, no one could ever speak for them again. And so, the story of the captain and the crown comes to a close. It serves as a powerful reminder that the loudest voice in the room isn't always the most powerful. True authority isn't bought with billions or commanded from a stage. It's nurtured in the soil of dignity, respect, and the quiet courage to walk your own path. The world is full of thrones, but it's the ground beneath them that holds the real power. If this story resonated with you, help us spread these powerful ideas. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and comment below with your thoughts on what it means to truly lead. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge the narrative and give voice to the unspoken. Thank you for watching.